She didn't scream. She didn't even speak. But when Grace Torres hit the diner floor, coffee dripping down her sleeve, her prosthetic twisted beneath her, everyone saw it. No one moved. Not the waitress. Not the manager. Not the man 3 feet away pretending to stare into his eggs. They just watched. Watched her lie there, this 45-year-old Marine veteran, as 3 bikers laughed like they just told the best joke in town. And exactly 30 minutes later, the door opened again, and 3 Marines walked in. Grace wasn't the kind of woman who demanded attention. She came to the Rusty Fork Grill for the same reason a ship returns to harbor: for safety, for routine, for that blessed predictability that keeps the world from spinning too fast. Every single afternoon, you'd find her at that corner table beneath the wall clock that couldn't keep proper time, rolling silverware with the precision of someone who'd learned that small acts of order can hold back chaos. You see, Grace had been Staff Sergeant Torres once upon a time. 2 tours in Fallujah had taught her things most folks never need to learn, like how courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving when fear tries to freeze you solid. That second tour took her leg and, truth be told, most of her faith that the world was a decent place. She chose the wheelchair over the prosthetic most days because it was honest work, no pretending required. In her coat pocket, she carried a worn leather wallet, and in that wallet lived one photograph, sun-bleached and precious. Her unit in the desert, all of them grinning despite the heat, arms thrown around each other like they'd found family in the middle of hell. On the back, someone had scrawled in thick black marker, "She carried us every damn time." She hadn't looked at that photo in years, but she was about to. The trouble started when the front doorbell clanged like a warning bell, and 3 men stomped in wearing their meanness like badges of honor. Tank, Goose, and Blade names stitched on leather vests like threats. They moved through that quiet diner like a storm front, all noise and bluster, claiming space that wasn't theirs to take. Tank spotted Grace first, and his smile was the kind that makes decent people look away. Well, he announced to his friends. Look what rolled in from the VA. Now, Grace had heard worse in her time. In Fallujah, insults were currency, and she'd learned not to spend hers on small minds. She kept rolling silverware, roll, fold, place, repeat, like a meditation that kept her anchored. But these 3 weren't content with being ignored. They got louder, crueler, feeding off each other's laughter like jackals. When Grace wheeled over with their menus, professional as you please, they saw kindness as weakness, service as surrender. "Ain't there some health code about wheels near food?" Goose sneered, and the whole room seemed to shrink around his words. That's when something shifted in the air. You know that feeling when a storm's coming? Grace felt it first. She'd learned to read danger the way sailors read weather, and she knew this wasn't over. At the coffee station, her hands stayed steady even as her breathing tightened. She'd survived roadside bombs and enemy fire. She wasn't about to let 3 bullies in a small-town diner break her composure. But then Blade made his mistake. He got up from his booth, walked up behind her wheelchair, and did something unforgivable. He grabbed her handles and yanked. The physics of cruelty are simple and devastating. Grace's chair lurched forward, caught a table leg, and sent her tumbling to that sticky tile floor. Coffee splashed across her arm, silverware scattered like shrapnel, and Grace, this woman who'd pulled soldiers from burning vehicles, hit the ground hard. The diner went cemetery quiet. Everyone froze like they were watching something they weren't supposed to see, something that would haunt them later when they tried to sleep. Grace didn't scream. She didn't cry out. But as she lay there with coffee soaking through her jeans, that precious photograph slipped from her wallet like a whispered prayer. Her unit, her brothers, her proof that she'd once been somebody who mattered. The 3 bikers laughed, not the kind of laughter that brings joy, but the ugly kind that feeds on someone else's pain. But Grace Torres had survived worse than this. She pressed her palms against that floor and pushed herself up with the dignity of someone who'd never learned to quit. She righted her chair, climbed back in, and sat there dripping coffee and radiating a quiet strength that filled the room. A little boy near the window broke the spell. "Dad," he whispered, "is that lady a soldier?" His father, a Desert Storm veteran named Daniels, didn't answer right away. He was staring at Grace, seeing something in her bearing that recognized itself. Slowly, he stood up, walked outside, and made a phone call that would change everything. "This is Sergeant Daniels," he said into his phone. "It involves one of ours. You're gonna want to send a team." Inside, Grace sat in her booth like a fortress under siege, shoulders square, hands folded, waiting for whatever came next with the patience of someone who'd learned that the best battles are won not with violence, but with endurance. The bikers grew louder, more confident. Not just any vehicle, something heavier, more purposeful. Through the window, they watched a military green SUV roll to a stop, Marine Corps insignia gleaming in the afternoon sun. The engine shut off. The door opened, and 3 Marines stepped inside. They didn't march in like movie heroes. They didn't make speeches or slam doors. They simply entered with the quiet authority of people who'd earned their presence in any room they chose to occupy. First came Master Sergeant Wilson, gray-haired, carrying a polished cane, moving with the controlled power of someone who'd once commanded fire teams in hostile territory. Behind him, a young corporal pushed an empty wheelchair. And finally, Captain Rodriguez, tall, composed, her uniform decorated with medals that told stories of real courage. They walked straight to Grace's table. Master Sergeant Wilson stopped, stood tall, and rendered a salute so crisp it could have cut glass. "Staff Sergeant Torres," he said, "forgive our delay." Grace's body remembered before her mind caught up. She returned that salute sharp and clean, and for the first time all day, her eyes burned with something other than pain. They burned with recognition, with respect, with the knowledge that she wasn't alone in this world after all. The young corporal stepped forward and looked directly at those 3 bikers who'd been so brave moments before. "She pulled 3 men from a burning Humvee in Fallujah," he said quietly. "I was one of them." The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the silence of cowardice, it was the silence of respect, of understanding, of a room full of people finally seeing what had been there all along. Then something beautiful happened. An old man in a Korean war cap stood up in the back and raised a trembling hand in salute. A woman near the door placed her hand over her heart. 2 National Guard members rose from their corner booth, backs straight and faces serious. Young Tommy climbed up on his seat and stood tall beside his father. And suddenly that little diner was transformed into something sacred, a place where honor lived and breathed and meant something again. The 3 bikers said nothing. They didn't apologize, they couldn't find words big enough for what they'd done. They just sat there, small and ashamed, while Grace Torres owned that room without ever raising her voice or standing up. She owned it by being exactly who she'd always been. A week later, the diner's name changed. The old rusty sign came down, replaced by hand-painted wood that read, "Home Front Cafe, where respect is always on the menu." The booth where the bikers had sat remained empty, not because anyone banned them, but because some spaces hold memory, and that memory taught lessons without words. Grace still came every afternoon, still folded napkins and rolled silverware, but now her Marine Corps pin rode proudly on her collar, and a small American flag patch decorated the back of her wheelchair, faded and frayed, but standing tall. Customers greeted her by name now. Some said thank you. Most didn't need to say anything at all. Respect has its own language, and Grace spoke it fluently. Every Thursday at 6 o'clock sharp, that green SUV would pull into the parking lot. Master Sergeant Wilson, Captain Rodriguez, and Corporal Jenkins would come inside, not for speeches or ceremonies, but for coffee and quiet fellowship. Because some battles aren't fought with weapons, they're fought with dignity and survived with grace. One evening, as the Montana sun painted the sky gold and the last light poured through the diner windows, the doorbell chimed softly. A young soldier stood there, barely out of high school, his uniform stiff and new, boots too clean, cap clutched nervously in his hands. His eyes held that particular mix of pride and terror that comes with a first deployment. Grace saw it immediately, that look she'd worn once herself. She wheeled forward, her flag patch catching the dying light. "First deployment?" she asked gently. He nodded, throat working. "Shipping out tomorrow morning, ma'am." She gestured to the empty seat at her table. "Sit down. Coffee's decent. Company's better." He hesitated. "I wouldn't want to intrude." Grace smiled, the first real smile she'd worn in that place. "You're not intruding, soldier. You're continuing a tradition." He sat. Across the room, Master Sergeant Wilson raised his coffee mug in a silent toast. Around the diner, other veterans lifted their cups, some with hands that trembled from age, others with backs still soldier straight. No words were needed. The message rang clear as church bells. You are seen. You are one of us. You'll never stand alone. The ripples spread outward from that day like stones thrown in still water. Grace spoke at the high school, not about war or glory, but about discipline and purpose and the sacred duty of carrying others when they can't carry themselves. Businesses began offering veteran discounts without being asked. The town approved a memorial for the square, simple, black stone with silver words, "To those who served with dignity and those who stood with them." The three bikers never came back. Word was one lost his job over a video that went viral, something about public conduct and consequences. Grace never asked about it. She had more important things to do, like mentoring the young female recruit who came every Sunday, or listening to the Vietnam veteran who, for the first time in 40 years, finally wore his medals again. As evening settled over the town, that green SUV waited in the dusk with a note taped to its window. "We always come back for those who never quit." And inside the Homefront Cafe, surrounded by coffee and memory and chosen family, Grace Torres was finally, truly home. Because sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on foreign soil. Sometimes they're fought in small-town diners by people who refuse to let dignity die, who understand that honor isn't about the uniform you wear, but about the character you carry. Grace Torres never stood up that day. She didn't need to. She was already standing tall in all the ways that mattered, showing a room full of strangers what it looks like when courage walks among us, quiet and unshakable, asking for nothing but respect and receiving everything in return.